Good morning, church family. All right. I think I'm on. Am I on? You got me? There we go. All right. We are going to be in Luke chapter 10, verses 38 to 42. It's page 869 in the Pew Bible, if you need it. Luke 10, 38 to 42, page 869 in the Pew Bible. Tim and Pavel are in Greensboro, North Carolina this weekend for the CCEF, which is the Christian Counseling and Education Foundation. They're there for their national conference. So the conference wraps up about when we wrap up this morning. So they'll be back late tonight and in the saddle tomorrow. All right, let's take a look at our passage. We're going to start just by reading the passage, and then I'll say a few things about it, and then we'll go home. Luke 10, verse 38. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching, but Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you're anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her." The word of the Lord. January 23rd, 2016 is a day that shall live in infamy in the Anderson household. Not because that's the day that Benjamin was born, not because that's the day Benjamin was born at home. We actually, aside from Sam, we had all of our children at home, as Jim Gaffigan says, to make you uncomfortable. We were planning a home birth, but the thing we weren't planning that happened that day was a blizzard. It snowed about 33 inches at the house there in Plumsteadville. And fortunately, our in-laws live about a half mile away, so my brother-in-law actually motored over on a quad and picked up the kids and motored them back. Probably the highlight of their lives, at least to this point, maybe forever. But there, Amber and I were stuck at the house. She was in labor, and we were anticipating the midwife coming over, and she said, "You really need to go out and shovel the driveway." I said, "She's got a Subaru, she'll be fine." Anyway, so I'm out shoveling the driveway. And the driveway at that house, it's not our current house, it was a double wide, and it was about 5 or 6 car lengths long. And I've never had a snowblower because I'm from Oklahoma, and I'm just morally opposed to it. But there I am shoveling, and essentially it's coming down faster than I can actually shovel it. And so I spent roughly 2 hours out there shoveling the snow. And the midwife had at least a fighter's chance of getting into the driveway to help us birth our baby boy. And after 2 hours of shoveling, I came back inside, and I slumped myself down on the couch, and I said, "My back is killing me." And you would think that was the lowest point I could reach. Not me. I'm not a quitter. The next thing I said was, "Babe, would you make me a sandwich?" And my 9.5 months pregnant wife, Amber, always went 42 weeks in a day with all 4 children. It was like clockwork. My 9.5 months pregnant wife said, "Oh, yeah? Can I make you you want me to make you a sandwich? What kind of sandwich would you like?" She was very gracious and generous, and she actually did make me the sandwich. Now, in fairness to myself, because I just feel the need to justify myself, This was our fourth child, and I just, through the habit of being around when my wife is in labor, I knew she enjoyed being up rather than sitting, busy doing things, so I was really helping her. And that is why January 23rd of 2016 is a day that will live in infamy in the Anderson household. See, the problem with me on that day was that somehow I had allowed my contribution to overshadow the main event. Somehow, on a day when it was all about Amber and all about Benjamin, I found a way to make it all about me. And that's exactly what Martha does here in this story. She allows her contribution to overshadow the main event. She becomes too enamored with herself to notice that she has the one who made her sitting in her living room. So I want to back up a little bit. This section here in Luke 10 is actually really, it's the end of a larger section that Luke is wrapping up that starts with the Transfiguration. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But just for the immediate context, I think it's helpful to note how this actually goes hand in hand with the story of the Good Samaritan, which Pavel preached on last week. See, the Good Samaritan, at least in my estimation, feels a little bit out of place when you consider the context of all of chapter 10. And I think the thing that helps place the Good Samaritan into this chapter is actually found in verse 21 of chapter 10, where it says, "In that same hour he," that is Jesus, "rejoiced in the Holy Spirit and said, 'I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and understanding and revealed them to little children.'" We have there Jesus actually declaring publicly his thanks that God has determined to reveal himself, not to those who are wise and understanding, but to those who are not, to those who are little children that often lack wisdom and understanding. And on the heels of Jesus declaring this, of thanking God for doing this thing, this lawyer stands up and says, "Wait a minute. Not all of us who are wise and understanding have missed the boat, right? What can I do to be saved?" As if there's anything more I need to do to be saved. And Jesus goes through the story of the Good Samaritan, and he says, "Let me tell you what the children look like that I'm talking about, that aren't wise and understanding. They look like a Samaritan." And then Luke continues his chapter and wants us to pick up, just in case you missed it. Let me tell you what another child looks like that is not wise and understanding. It's a girl. A girl. Maybe even a young girl. We actually don't know how old Mary is here. But Luke pinpoints for those who would want to justify themselves, for those who would want to say, "Yeah, I get all of this." He pinpoints the lowliest among them. I'm not saying that girls are lowly, but in the ancient Near Eastern culture, it's debatable which one was worse in the eyes of a Jewish man, a Samaritan or a girl. And Jesus says, "I and the Father and the Holy Spirit have revealed things that are far too complicated for you to figure out, that are far too wonderful for you to rack your brains around. I haven't revealed them to the people who have studied long and hard and deep. I've revealed them to Samaritans and little girls. And that should give us hope. All of us can become like little children. Not all of us can become like the wise and scholarly. God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. And that's what this passage is all about this morning. So we learn in verse 38, now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village. This should sound a little bit familiar. And a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. Now, what do we know about Martha? Just from the text right there. We know she's hospitable. It seems that she has a house. Interestingly, this is the only spot in all of the Gospels where this particular story is told. There are others, Good Samaritan, you find it in other texts. There are other aspects of the Gospel stories that show up in Matthew, Mark, Luke, some in John. This is the only spot where we see this, and we don't even see Lazarus named at this point. We learn about him from the Gospel of John that's written decades later. So we know that Martha's hospitable. We know she has a house. That probably means that she's got some measure of wealth. Do we know anything else about her? Yeah, we do. The context of the chapter, if you look back in 10:1, Jesus sends out the 72, and he says, after this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them on ahead of him, 2 by 2, into every town and place where he himself was about to go. And lo and behold, this is the first town he walks into, Bethany. And he tells the 72 when they go out in verse 5 and 6, whatever house you enter, first say, peace be to this house. And if a son of peace is there, your peace will rest upon him. So Martha's house is likely one of the first houses that was visited by one of the pairings within the 72 that are talked about in chapter 10. And so what that tells us is more than that Martha is a hospitable person or potentially a wealthy woman within her cultural context, it tells us that she is a daughter of peace. It's easy to pick on the people in the scriptures that make blunders. Peter is the easiest of all of them by far. But it's good to consider that Martha is a whole person. She's not just this one brash type A female that just lets Jesus know exactly how she feels all the time. And she does it in John as well. That's just who she is. Martha is a daughter of peace. And so unlike the interaction that we see with the lawyer in the Good Samaritan, where we've got people, certainly the Samaritan seems to be in the kingdom, but the lawyer and the robbers and the priest and the Levite, they don't seem to be. In this scenario, we've got two people that are in the kingdom. We see two responses to Jesus. And more than likely, we embody both of them at various points. There are times when you are sons or daughters of peace, when you sit at the feet of Jesus and listen to him. There are probably also times, I guarantee you, there are also times when you speak out of turn and when you think it's all about you. We rotate back and forth. And Martha is one of those daughters of peace. So what do we know about her sister? Not much. Mary doesn't actually say anything in this text. Verse 39, she had a sister called Mary. We know her name is Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. That's all we get. We don't see her speak at any point. We don't see her respond to Martha. She doesn't defend herself. She just sits at the Lord's feet. But Martha, on the other hand, was distracted with much serving. That's a frightening verse. The Greek for the word serving there is diakonia. Probably recognize it. It's where we get our word deacon from. She was distracted with much serving. Why is that a frightening verse? Because she's doing something good. And she's also sinning at the same time. It's possible for us. Sin is so insidious that it is possible for us to at once be doing something we ought to be doing in a way or a manner in which we ought not be doing it. It's one of the reasons that Paul, at the end of Romans 7, of talking about his bipolar back and forth of doing the thing he doesn't want to do, and oh, wretched man that I am, he just sort of throws his hands up and says, who could possibly deliver me from this body of sin and death? He's just utterly frustrated. Martha puts some real flesh around Romans 7. If you want to know what it looked like for Paul to do the thing that he didn't want to do in the midst of doing the thing that he did want to do, look at verse 40. Martha was distracted with much serving. If it's possible for us to do the wrong thing, even while we're doing the right thing, serving, we could substitute that word out and put in the word ministry. Did you know it's possible for me as a pastor? I don't know if you caught from Anna's reference over and over and over that my name is Pastor Greg, but I'm a pastor. Did you know that it's possible for me to do my job in an unholy way? It's possible for me to do it's possible for me to do this thing right here and be distracted from the one I'm actually supposed to be serving. It's possible for you to sit there, to stand up during the worship service, to sing the songs that are thrown up there, and to be distracted from the one you're actually supposed to be serving. You're actually supposed to be worshiping. That is a terrifying thought, or at least it ought to be, that I can do the right thing and still be doing the wrong thing. The good news is, verse 39 actually provides us the answer. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. If you want to make sure you're not distracted while you're serving, that's the answer. There's no magic formula. I don't have anything super fantastic to say. Just look at verse 39. Mary sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. Now, is that to say that we should just all sell it, everything that we've got, move to a commune, just read the scriptures and pray all day, there's no work to be done? No, that's not what Jesus is saying at all. Remember, consider the greater context of the passage here. Right? Chapter 10 is where we actually likely meet Martha, and the 72 enter her house as a daughter of peace. But Jesus says, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray to the Lord of the harvest that he would send his workers out. This isn't a passage about work so much. It's not about whether we should be still and quiet and silent all of the time or busy and about all sorts of business. It's a passage about priority. It's a passage about, does the Lord need me or do I need the Lord? Fundamentally, that's what it comes down to. So Martha being distracted, and this is a lesson for all of us, She's distracted from the one she's actually supposed to be serving, and then she goes and makes it worse. I enjoy or lament or I don't know. I find Genesis 3 to be a rather puzzling, interesting, fascinating exposure to sin in the human heart. See, we all look back at the apple, if it was an apple, and that was the sin. But as soon as sin enters the world, it's not just one. They just keep coming. It's like rapid fire, right? All of a sudden, Eve takes the bite of the apple, and then Adam takes a bite of an apple, and now Adam's hiding from God. He's blaming the woman. He's blaming God. He's denying responsibility. He's pushing. All of a sudden, right? There was no sin at all. And the minute sin enters the door, it blows it off the hinges. And it is everywhere, and it's rampant. Martha is no different. She's distracted with much serving. She's doing the wrong thing while she's doing the right thing. And then she goes up to Jesus, as if this is the first attempt to get Mary to come help her. This is the last attempt, right? We know how this goes. I've seen the look from my wife when she's serving things at the table, and I have not helped with anything at all. If it's at our house, I didn't even drive the meal there. Right? I've seen her give me the eyes that are like, hey, anytime you want to get up and do anything, I'd be okay with that. Right? She has presumably at some point given Mary that look. She has presumably at points stood in front of Mary while Mary is trying to listen to Jesus, intentionally blocking her view. Right? There's all sorts of things that she has, she's probably knocked over the tea or something like that in front. There's all sorts of things that have happened up to this point where Martha has actually and likely attempted to distract Mary. There's another really frightening thing, that in doing the right thing, we can be doing the wrong thing and also recruiting others to do the wrong thing. Oh, wretched person that I am, who will save me from this body of sin and death? And so Martha, as her last attempt, appeals to Jesus. She asks the sovereign creator of the universe to tell her sister to help her. Think about that for a moment. Think about the audacity that comes with it. And of course, she says, "Don't you care?" That reminds me of when the disciples run to Jesus on the boat that is sinking in the midst of the storm and say, "Hey, we're drowning. Do you not care about that?" There's this implicit, it's not even implicit, there's an explicit question here of whether or not Jesus is good. There's also probably part of Martha that is thinking sort of in the vein of Simon the Pharisee, who, when Jesus has the woman of ill repute crying on his feet, thinks, if this guy were a prophet, I think he'd know what sort of woman that was. Right? Martha's probably got this question in her brain. Look, if this guy were really who he says he is, you'd think he'd pick up on at least one of my nonverbal cues. I mean, I've been signaling Mary half a dozen ways, and he doesn't seem to have noticed anything, let alone, even if I hadn't signaled, he doesn't seem to realize that I'm doing all the work and she's doing, does he not care? Mary doesn't just ask Jesus to step in, she actually impugns his character. She's been distracted from the things she was supposed to be focused on. She's tried to recruit her sister into the same distraction and she's accused the sovereign creator of herself, of not caring. I think the greater context of the passage is helpful at this point because I feel like Luke is wrapping flesh around a problem that he has been circling for a chapter and a half. See, this is actually the bookend of something that started in chapter 9. It's verse 35. Verse 35 of chapter 9, we encountered Jesus on the Mountain of Transfiguration, and he has been transformed, and his glory is shining forth. He is visiting with Moses and Elijah, and the voice of the eternal God speaks. This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him. Now, it's interesting in this account that you also have a son of peace. You have Peter, who is all about doing something for God. He says, Jesus, this is great. We should set up houses for all of us right here and never go down. And the Father's response to him is, this is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him. Did you know that through the rest of chapter 9 and through all of chapter 10 until we get to verse 39 of chapter 10, no one is described as listening to him? Not a single person, but Mary is. Verse 39, and she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. Mary is the first person since Jesus came down from the mountain, his literal mountaintop experience. She's the first person that's just done what the Father asked. Martha, on the other hand, is the embodiment of everyone else that Jesus has encountered. Jesus comes down from the mountain. He's just been transfigured. He met with Moses and Elijah. I can't even quantify in the American context who that's meeting with because we're so divided at this point. I don't know. It's like meeting Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. No, that's wrong. Well, I don't know. You get the point. He's met with Moses and Elijah, and the sovereign creator of the universe, the Father, whom he is co-eternal with, has spoken out of the thick cloud and said, this is my son, my chosen one, listen to him. And he comes down from the mountain, and the first thing that happens, he has some guy come up and say, hey, I got a demon-possessed kid, and, well, your disciples, they're kind of underwhelming. Like, I've heard big things, but nothing. What's going on? And Jesus says, faithless generation, how long am I going to put up with you? And he heals the boy. And then you go on from there, and you would think that there would be some response from the disciples saying, hey, obviously we didn't do a great job there. How do we do better the next time? And they do. They actually do sort of say that thing. They say, how come we couldn't cast the demon out? And then 30 seconds later, they're arguing about which one of us do you think is going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And then after that, they're talking about firebombing a Samaritan city because they didn't accept Jesus. And then all of a sudden, they're telling certain people who are casting out demons, remember the thing they couldn't do, They're shooing them away because they're not wearing the right t-shirts. And then all of a sudden, Jesus takes this ragtag bunch of individuals and gathers them together and says, all right, I'm going to send you out into this field for harvest. I want you to go, and I want you to proclaim the kingdom. Everything's ready for harvest. All you got to do is just put the sickle in, pull it out, you got fruit. It's great. Everything's ready for you. And they come back, they're high-fiving, they're jumping up and down, they're patting each other on the back. Jesus comes up and says, well, so how'd it go? And they say, you're not going to believe this. We can cast demons out. We can cast demons. The thing that they had been able to do at the beginning of chapter 9, and then all of a sudden couldn't do at the end of chapter 9, is now the thing that they can do. Jesus says, I want you to go out, and I want you to bring in a harvest. I want you to share the kingdom, and I want you to win laborers to the cause. And they don't come back and talk about the sons and daughters of peace that they engaged with. They don't come back and talk about the Israelites who are actually understanding that the kingdom is near. They don't come back and talk about the people who recognize Jesus as the Christ. They come back and say, we have superpowers. And it transports you back to the very end of chapter 9. They're not any further along. Because it's all about them. They seem to be under some delusion that Jesus needs them. So we come to the real heart of chapter 10. Jesus. Verse 41, he says, Martha, Martha. He uses her name twice. Jesus does this a few times. We know what's coming next. He does it with Simon Peter, just before Peter denies him. He says, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you. He says it about Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I longed to gather you like a hen gathers her chicks, but you weren't willing. He says it to Paul on the road to Damascus when Paul comes to faith. He says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And the thing that sort of ties all of those together is a blend of correction and compassion. He wants the people that he's speaking to in those scenarios to turn from the direction they're walking. He wants Martha to turn from the direction he is walking. He's correcting her, but in the most gentle and loving of terms. Martha, Martha. He's not condemning her. He's calling her. You were anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. See, Martha, in her distraction, has been coalesced. She's been captured by her particular perspective of who she should be and what she should be about. She's doing the thing culturally that she ought to be doing, busying herself. She's doing the thing that provides for strong and good reputation. She wants to be known as the person who takes good care of her guests. There's actually not anything wrong with that. She wants to be known as the hospitable person There's actually not anything wrong with that. But all of a sudden, she's lost focus and sight of what the one thing is that's necessary. Again, frightening thing about that, he's sitting in her living room. It's so easy to get distracted from the one thing that is necessary, the one thing that actually can't be taken away from us. Another frightening thing, Martha's just let it go. It wasn't taken away from Mary. It wasn't even taken away from Martha. He's still sitting right there. She just hasn't picked him up. She's just let him go. And Jesus says, all of these things that you're worried about, that trouble you, that cause anxiety. Did you know they had anxiety in the first century? It's right here. Jesus says, the way you get rid of that is priority. Do you have to take care of your family? Yeah, you have to take care of your family. Do you need to be a good Israelite and be hospitable? Yeah, you do need to do that. Do you need to show concern and care for travelers? Yep, that's part of the law. But there's one thing you have to do first. You have to sit at my feet and listen to my words. Why? Because you're the person that gets distracted even while you're doing the right thing. You're the person that does the wrong thing while you're doing the right thing. You're the person that recruits. I thought there was a question there. You're welcome to ask a question, right? You're the person that recruits in the distraction. You're the person that talks back to the Lord. You're the person that needs. Okay? There's only one thing that's necessary. And look at all of the evidence that Martha gives for how deeply she needs Jesus. See, the problem with Martha's priorities is that she's not convinced she does need him. So let me flip this around. You need him. I need him. I am just like the disciples going around high-fiving about the cool things I have done in the name of Christ. I'm just like the disciples wondering, am I the greatest? Maybe I'm the third greatest. Ordination's got to count for something, right? I'll tell you, during times of suffering, difficulty, hardship, which is actually what Martha perceives. She perceives herself to be alone in a difficult, tough time. That is actually the time when I most am tempted to be like Martha, to wonder, does God care? Like, I'm pouring forth all of this effort. Does he even care? Does he notice the contribution that I am making? And there we are, right back at January 23rd, 2016. My contribution distracted me from taking in the main event. It is not about you. It is not about your talents and your gifts. It is not about your ability to do the right thing, because even when you do the right thing, you are going to do the wrong thing. If you take nothing else this morning, take this. You need him. The one thing, the thing that Mary has chosen, it's not a good thing. It's not a nice to have thing. It's not a nice collector's item. It is a necessary thing. Because without Jesus, without sitting at his feet and listening to his words, you are Martha. And that's a road you don't want to go down, because it continues to spiral and spiral and spiral. Fortunately, the God that sat in her living room is the God that presides over this thing. And just like Jesus said, Martha, Martha, you're distracted and anxious and worried about all kinds of things. Only one thing is necessary. That this here is doing the same thing this morning. Jesus is calling to each one of us. Hey, you know the thing you're thinking about right now? You don't need it. There's one thing you do need. You need me way more than you give yourself credit for. You think you're strong. You think you have all of these gifts and abilities to bring to the table. You're just like Martha. Only one thing is necessary. It won't be taken away, but will you take advantage of it? Let's pray. Father, I am at a loss over your grace. We are, all of us, like the disciples who can't cast out the demons, like the disciples that argue about which one of us is the greatest. We're like the lawyer that stands up to justify ourselves. So rarely are we like the Samaritan or Mary, we're Marthas. And yet, you are the same yesterday, today, and forever. You were gracious. You were humble. You were good. You were patient. Father, thank you for extending to us your hand and your heart. Lord, I pray that through the power of your Spirit, you would help us to do the right thing while we're doing the right thing, to be focused on the one that is necessary, to recognize our deep, deep need for you and you alone. I pray these things through the Son and by the Spirit. Amen.